Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another update on energy efficiency. Today we're going to chat about the 7-star change, or NCC'22 I probably should say, because some states aren't really calling it 7-star. NCC'22 changes, updates, and which states are going to be taking it up and which states are transitioning, and all the different types of things are happening, because it's certainly not consistent across the board. We've done a few updates in the past with different information that we've had. Today we've collated that information together to try and make it a little easier for everyone to understand. And within the email there's links to each of these documents, so you can come back and have a read yourself. Because there's some parts of this that we won't be covering, like livable housing standards and things like that today, that are subject to different transitional requirements as well. So this is 3rd of the 4th, 23, and this is the most up-to-date information that we've managed to source, and we'll go through state by state with you today. So the first one's Northern Territory. So Northern Territory, there's a link, as I said before, in the email that you can have a look. This was last updated on the 25th of November by HIA, and this, as far as I'm concerned, is still current today. Now, the Northern Territory government have come out and said that they will not be going to NCC'22 residential energy. They're going to be keeping the existing 5-star arrangements that are already in place now. So if we look down through here, you can see here, it's important that builders understand energy efficiency variations for residential developments will not change and shall remain at 5 stars. This is relevant for dwellings, apartments, and Class 4 units. Now, what is interesting is the commercial buildings. So commercial buildings here, for the first time, NT will be taking up provisions for commercial buildings. So that will mean that they'll be taking up not NCC'22, but they'll be taking up NCC 2019 as far as commercial buildings is concerned. You can see their provisions outlined in NCC 2019. So that's a bit of an interesting one, probably a move that's been sort of looking to happen for a fair while with regards to Northern Territory. But as far as residential is concerned, they're not going to NCC'22, and they'll be staying on NCC 2019, and they have their own sort of rules for that anyway, with regards to 5-star and so forth. If you're familiar with that with that state, then you'll understand what I'm talking about. If you're not familiar and you want to read up a bit more, then you can take a read of the doco. So that's NT. Then we're going to move to Western Australia. So Western Australia, this is probably I don't know. It's not overly complicated to understand, but the way that they've worded it's a little bit different to some of the others. And there's a mixture of Volume 1 and Volume 2 in here, and what's going to happen. But essentially, they've announced transitional arrangements. And NCC'22 is optional until the 1st of May 2025. That's the, I suppose, the guts of what they're saying here. So if we read down, we can see here that there's some information about Volume 1 and residential Class 2 buildings. They've got some information here on sole occupancy units where the building is more than 6 stories. Collectively, they need to achieve an average of 7 stars and individually achieve an energy rating of not less than 5 stars. Sole occupancy units, where the building is 6 stories or less, collectively achieve an average of 6 stars and individually achieve an energy rating of not less than 5. So not anything groundbreaking really there. With regards to residential energy efficiency for Class 2, that will become mandatory on the 1st of May 2025. And Volume 2 of the NCC, including the new energy provisions, will become mandatory in WA on May the 1st, 2025. So Everything up until then can be assessed under NCC 2019. So there's no real big change there. What is interesting, or I suppose what they've left out here, is that the NCC 25 will be very very close to that timeline. So they're making what's mandatory in 22, mandatory in 25. But there's no word of like what that looks like once 25 comes out. So there may be a bit of overarching stuff that comes out in 25 that may have a bearing and may not be huge changes to NCC 22. So they may even end up adopting 25 instead. Who knows? But at the moment we don't need to worry about it too much in Western Australia, apart from the comments that are there. That takes us through to South Australia next. So South Australia, interesting one in that they've said that that the main provisions will be adopted 1st of May 2023 in South Australia. This will include all provisions except for energy efficiency, livable housing, condensation mitigation and lead-free plumbing products. The transitional timeframes for these requirements are subject to final decision by the state government. So that's probably the big takeaway here, is that they're saying that they are not taking them up yet. That they're talking about a transitional time frame, but they haven't made a decision. And there's no update since this document that I'm aware of that states otherwise. So for now, with South Australia, we just need to wait and see what happens, because they're not giving us a lot of information on that. When we go to Queensland, so Queensland are moving to the NCC 22. They are moving to 7-star, which they're talking about here. And they're also adopting the new whole of home energy budget, which in the coming weeks we'll do a webinar just on a whole of home, because that's something that people in the areas in the states that are moving to NCC 22 need to be familiar with and need to understand how it works, and also sort of understand a bit of the underlying defaults and different ways that the assessments might go, because that's going to make an impact on whether it's going to be compliant or not. So it's something that we'll talk about in the coming weeks, but something that is certainly on the radar for some states. So Queensland have gone into a little bit more detail than the other states so far, and they've actually put in an average capital cost for moving from 6 to 7-star, and what the payback period might look like for those. So they've brought a bunch of different climate zones in. They've brought what they think that it's going to cost roughly, and then have a payback period for those changes based on electricity costs. Now, in reality, I think probably a few people are going to argue a little bit with this, and I'm sure that it's all estimated on their end. Our experience is that moving from 6 to 7-star is quite a big jump. Probably not as big in Queensland as it is in some other states, but it's certainly not just a case of ticking a few extra boxes and putting some extra insulation in, because that's certainly not the outcome that you're going to need. And depending on the design and the location and the shading and all these other factors, it might be that it will cost you significantly more to get from 6 to 7-star than what's stated on here. When you get into other areas like smaller units and smaller buildings that may be of a different nature, they will obviously cost less to upgrade, and this graph may be a little more I suppose accurate in that sense. So if you're looking at custom homes, I don't think that this is necessarily going to be your experience. If you're looking at small units and places that don't take up a lot of room and already rate quite well, then this is probably something that's a little bit more appropriate. They've announced a transition period as well. Transition periods from the 1st of May 23 to the 1st of October 23, and it will be mandatory from the 1st of October. We'll talk about that transition period right at the end because there's some stuff there that could interest people. So yes, that's where we're talking about the transition period down here, and most of the states, if they are using a transition period, have stated it. So that's one to look out for if you're in Queensland. New South Wales. So New South Wales, as anyone that works in New South Wales knows, they take on a different approach to all other states, and they have basics. Now, basics is a plug-in really to the NAFA's energy rating, and looks at more than just the building materials and how the place is designed. It looks at water and energy and other areas. So NCC'22 is going to be adopted by New South Wales, and what they've said is that they're moving to a high stringency with basics. Now, does that mean 7-star necessarily? Not sure. I'd be silly to say that it does when they're not stating it specifically, but my previous experience would tell me that it probably is, well, potentially can be 7-star, will be a minimum to push your basics assessment up to a point where it's going to be, complied at a reasonable specification. So they've also noted a transition period from the 1st of May to the 1st of October, and will be 1st of October will be mandatory. They also have talked a little bit about DAs and what the transitional timeline looks like. That's an interesting one for New South Wales, and I would suggest, while other states haven't specifically stated this is a fairly standard way of doing transitional requirements that we've seen in previous NCCs from 16 and 19 and so forth, where it talks about the different provisions and what is required for each of them. So they're saying from the 1st of May, all provisions except for energy efficiency basics, condensation management and livable housing will apply. So they're saying that everything in the NCC'22 apart from these things will apply, and then they're giving a transitional requirement to the 1st of October, and then we can see here new energy and condensation management provisions apply to CC or CDC applications submitted on or after this date, except as modified by basics. So a little bit of a clause at the end, but basically anything that's going in, again, it talks about in the next line the new basics requirements will apply to development applications submitted on or after this date. As it currently stands, the livable housing provisions will not be adopted in New South Wales for NCC'22. And then they're talking about the reduced lead content will be from September 1st, 2025, which we're not going to go into today, but if that's something you're interested in, then you may want to read up a little bit more about it. So it's saying here, basics is updated to align closely with NCC 2022 requirements with increased stringency targets for thermal and energy performance. So the takeaway out of that is that it's aligned closely. We're not sure exactly how close or what is required yet, but there is a new requirement as well that will be introduced in New South Wales to measure and report on embodied carbon of major building materials used. That's something that will probably be in basics, and we've seen things like this previously, so I don't think it's going to be too much of a shock, but just talking about the different information. It also says care will be needed to ensure that you are using the correct NAFA's software and or basics tools for your project with respect to the development application approval application date. The existing software and tools must be used to generate basic certificates and DA CDC submitted up until 30th of September 2023. The new updated software and tools will be needed for your DA if your DA CDC is going to be submitted on or after 1st of October. Now, to be fair, it's probably these transitional requirements are probably required because we don't have updated software yet. Anyway, it hasn't been approved. It's still in the last stages of being, having that information collated. We've been beta testers for it, and all things so far, everything looks to be pretty good. We've actually seen an increase in star rating, so getting from 6 to 7 may not be quite as difficult, but it's still going to prove to be a challenge in some areas. Then we go on to, where are we? Victoria. So, Victoria is going to take up 7-star minimum, and they've also talked about transitional requirements again from 1st of May to the 1st of October. This, I think, is probably going to be the biggest impact on the industry as far as Victorians are concerned. It's quite a big one. It's very similar to Tasmania in climate zone, and they're both challenging climate zones to get higher ratings with. It becomes very important. The design becomes very important, but also the location and orientation and shading, insulation levels, and it ends up to a point where a lot of the time we're putting a lot of pressure on the windows because we're doing everything we can as far as the thermal shell's concerned. The windows are letting us down, and then we end up having to upgrade our windows. The challenge with that is that if it's not expected, then the costs will blow out. If you saw a graph that was similar to, where are we? To Queensland's graph, I think this would look a lot different from 6 to 7. I really do. For Victoria, it's going to be a challenge. It's already a challenge. We are assessing and working with designers on getting ready for 7-star at the moment, and there's not a silver bullet for it. A lot of people are asking us, hey, what are the top 3 things that we can't do now? So, well, it's difficult to narrow it down like that because it's so design specific, it's so climate zone specific, postcode specific. It's difficult to say. So every house is going to be slightly different, which is why we've started working with people using the optimization reports, because they've really helped us open our eyes to each room, what it's doing, what its star figure is, whether it's hot in the summer or cool in the winter. We've really started to break that down so that we can get better information to be able to make some changes to the building and help it, and help it in like those 2 and 5% locations, that start to add up to having a 10 to 20% gain overall, which helps us get to that, closer to that 7-star mark. So Victoria is going to be a challenging one, just from its climate zone perspective. ACT. So ACT, again, they are moving to 7-star. They've got a transition period as well from the 1st of May to the 1st of October, and will be mandatory from that point forward. So they've also put some information in as far as the building approval is concerned and the transition periods, so you can read up on that and understand a bit better, where you sit. The last one, Tasmania. So Tassie has said no to NCC 22, but they're taking up little bits of it. Now I don't know quite how this is going to play out in reality, because we're pulling some bits out of NCC 22 and we're not using others. So it'd be interesting to see how it goes. The Tassie government have talked about their reasoning behind why they are not going to go to 7 stars, and that was predominantly around condensation issues, and they believe that the condensation problem is not going to get better with 7 stars. It could potentially get worse. So they want to make sure that they're prepared for that, and UTAS has been engaged for another condensation study to try and help with that. That's already started as far as I'm concerned and underway. So we're hoping to get some results from that in the next 12 months or something like that. So there is a bit of a changed timeline for Tassie, and so 1st of October 2023, condensation mitigation provisions are going to be adopted. So that's basically on that transition period. The other states are taking, they're going to just take up that one. And then on the 1st of October 24, they're going to be taking up the livable housing provisions. And then they're talking about NCC 25 here, 7-star NAFAs. They're saying it's considered. So at the end, they've just dropped in the word considered. So we don't know whether they'll take that up or not at that point. But it's not unusual. So we've seen Tassie do this in the past. They did it from 5-star to 6-star as well. And it's not unusual for them to delay the NCC rollout of the energy efficiency provisions. Their issues are very similar to Victoria's with condensation and other things in that area. So they're very conscious about that, I think, and they want to make sure that they're not going to create a bigger problem by trying to raise stringentness and tighten regulation. So and look, the transitional period, we'll just talk about that quickly. Normally that talks about substantial design started, but we have seen in a few of these state updates where they're talking about DAs approved. So technically speaking, in say ACT, you could have your DA approved on the 30th of September, and that would still, the BA for that would still fall under NCC 2019. So interesting transitional requirements there on how that is going to play out. It may be that we end up seeing for an extended period of time, the transitional period's going a little bit further than what they've actually stated on there, just by the way that the rules are played out. Some other states have said that it's building approvals, so building approvals prior to 30th of September would be under NCC 2019. So look, it's a little bit all over the place. We also wrote to the Tasmanian government last week, guys in the office did, and asked the question of whether they would allow for you to design under NCC 22 and take up 7-star provisions in Tasmania, even though we're not taking it up. I know that sounds like probably a pretty obvious question, but it's not in the sense of if we're acknowledging that there's condensation problems and that the government doesn't want to go to 7-star, the question needs to be asked whether they'll allow design to be assessed under NCC 22 or not, or whether they're actually going to say no to it. So they've said that it's likely that you could still design under NCC 22, but you'd need to check with your building surveyor because it's going to be up to their determination at the end of the day. So interesting one. I'm not sure how that's going to play out really, but time will tell. Apart from that, I think that there's some challenges for the southern states coming up with regards to 7-star, and potentially even in New South Wales with the higher stringency of basics coming in. So they're things to consider. But overall, this is a bit of an overview of where we're at as of right now, and hopefully in the next few weeks we'll get another update. Probably the last thing that I'll leave on is that if there's a state that isn't taking up NCC 2022, we're yet to get a decision on whether we're using updated software or not. Now, why that makes a difference? The new software takes into consideration thermal bridging for steel-framed buildings much better. You end up getting penalised for those, and we also have new climate zone files, which in our opinion, in our eyes, we've seen a we've seen that the climate files have helped most of the ratings that we've done. So that's by about 0.2 of a star. Now, if we're not moving, if that state isn't moving to 7-star, can we use that software that's about to be released, or do we have to still use the old software? That answer hasn't been, that question, sorry, hasn't been answered yet. We hope to hear something on it soon, because there could be room for the tool to be used more accurately. I think that the new software is probably a little more accurate, especially with the new climate zone files in it. And also, there's talk about the access to a lot more of the WERS window files and WERS codes, which is only going to be helpful because at the moment there's quite a few codes that are missing out of there, or that it's not updated as frequently as it should be. So a couple of things to note. But I hope you all enjoyed it. Till next week, thanks very much for watching. Cheers.